All right, good morning. My name is Dean Bell. I'm the Dean and Chief Academic Officer at the Skorka Institute for Jewish Learning and Leadership here in Chicago. And on behalf of all of my colleagues there, as well as my good friends and colleagues here at DePaul University, I'm delighted to welcome you to this session on the conference New World Pope, Pope Francis and the Future of the Church. I've been charged with a number of things. The first and most important is to introduce our very distinguished speaker today. But as happens with moderation, I also get to, shall we say, circumscribe your questions later on. And I've been asked to deliver a few housekeeping messages. So the first, and I suppose most important, is that there are books for sale in the lobby. You should certainly avail yourself of the opportunity to purchase them. The second is, I was asked to make a special welcome to those of you who've traveled from warmer climates, which can be just about anywhere in the world, actually. And thank you for your persistence in being part of this wonderful conference. You may have intuited that our speaker is not able to be here in person today due to some medical issues, but we're really quite appreciative that he's made the effort and taken the technological plunge here to join us in this virtual fashion. So thank you for your flexibility, Rabbi Skorka. This morning I have the great honor to introduce a remarkable scholar and leader of the Jewish community of Argentina. In fact, I've heard from a number of colleagues, including a very distinguished colleague at Skorka, Rabbi Victor Mirelman, who I believe you know, Rabbi Skorka, and he sends his personal regards. I've heard about the wonderful intellectual and pastoral qualities of our speaker today. Rabbi Abraham Skorka serves as rector of the Latin American Rabbinical Seminary in Buenos Aires, and also as the rabbi of the B'nai Tikva community there. He holds a PhD from the University of Buenos Aires, as well as an honorary doctorate from the Catholic Pontifical University of Argentina, and another in Hebrew letters from the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. He established the Jewish law programs at the University of Buenos Aires and the University of Salvador, a Jesuit institution in Buenos Aires. Rabbi Skorka is also the author of several books, as detailed, including one that I think many of you are quite familiar with for the topic at hand today. He has dedicated his life to meaningful and constructive dialogue, which he insightfully describes as follows, and I quote, "True dialogue is at the heart of a thinking man's life and demands that each person tries to get to know and understand the person with whom they are conversing. When conversing with one's fellow man, words are merely vehicles for communicating. Although even in societies where everyone speaks the same language, the exact same words can take on somewhat different meanings. Each person adds their own nuance to many of the words they use, which then become part of the linguistic heritage. Dialogue requires that each participant become acquainted with the other person." End quote. With that note, and without further delay, please welcome Rabbi Skorka as he discusses the next step in the Judeo-Catholic dialogue.
Well, good morning to all of you from the afternoon here in Buenos Aires. And after my good friend, the Pope Francisco, became his condition of Pope, I thought about all what we did together since the late 90s until he became Pope. All the dialogue we developed together, and I wrote my thoughts in a paper that I named The Next Step, and I would like to share my thoughts, this paper, with you in this special very moment. Is to foresee in some way how has to be the next step in our dialogue. Of course, that our dialogue reach certain point between us, between all of those people who are involved and who work really deeply in order to develop it. But I am aware that the dialogue must down to all the people, to the simple person, and they must be transformed into actions, many actions. And from another point of view, my point of view is, but all those leaders that already reach certain point in the dialogue, how has the dialogue must go ahead, taking into account that we have in this very moment in the history of humanity a Pope who emphasizes in a very special way the concept of dialogue. So I wrote this paper with these ideas in my mind. I call that the next step towards what kind of reality we have to work to go to. This was the aim, the challenge I put before me in the moment when I began to write this paper. During the almost 2,000-year-long history of relations between Jews and Christians were moments of encounter and deep dialogue, as well as moments of and hatred. Israel Yaakov Yuval's book, Two Nations in Your Home, presents a very well-documented study about the complex relationships between Jews and Christians in medieval Europe, and Edward Flannery's famous The Anguish of the Jews provides a meticulous history of 23 centuries of anti-Semitism in which Christianity played an important role. The very survival of Jewish people presented a challenge to Christian theology. The killers of God's Son were still alive, continuing to deny the truth of their faith. The Jews were considered as a deicide people, and as a cursed people, they deserved the humiliating treatment. European cities like Paris in 1240, Barcelona in 1263, Tortosa 4013, 4014, and others have held during their history infamous and dreadful theological disputes between Jews and Catholic sages. The Catholics were sanctified by both sides, but their interpretation diverged from one another. Even in the 20th century, we can find modern disputations, such as the one carried on as a result of the publications of Adolf von Harnack's classic, The Essence of Christianity, and Leo Beck's reply to it, The Essence of Judaism. However, the Shoah perpetrated in the heart of the Christian Europe clearly demonstrated the futility of vain disputations. The Nazi regime destroyed once and for all the illusions of what Leo Beck had called, on quotation signs, the romantic dimension of religion, which in contrast to the classical character of the Jewish religion, Christianity had internalized as an essential aspect of its religiosity. The Shoah demanded an answer from Christianity. The European culture in which the Christian components is so important and vital was bankrupt. The atrocities committed against the Jewish population in the territories under the Nazi administration, with the collaboration of many members of the different European peoples, deep and critical analysis. of the roots of European culture and the uniqueness of this horrible drama in human history called for a conscientious reaction from the different European churches. Pope Pius XII passed away on October 9, 1958, and until now there is no registered document of his authorship regarding the Shoah, and the theological problem arises. Only his successor, the Pope John XXIII, who did so much to rescue Jews during the Second World War, accepted the unavoidable challenge. On October 11, 1962, after 2 years of preparation, the Second Vatican Council opened its sessions. On October 28, 1965, the Declaration Nostra Aetate was approved by 2,221 votes in favor and 88 against. Pope Paul VI promulgated solemnly the document. 3 are the main affirmations of the document. First, the Jewish people are still beloved by God. Second, one cannot ascribe the death of Jesus even to the entire Jewish population of his time, much less so to any of their descendants. Even the infamous word deicide, killers of God, does not appear in the text. In the text of Nostra Aetate doesn't appear for theological reasons. The prohibition of blaming the Jews as the killers of God becomes explicit. And third, an explicit condemnation against all kinds of anti-Semitic expressions or teachings. The relationships between the Catholic Church and the Jews. Only later on paragraphs were added that related to Islam and other religions. John the 23rd was the one who took the initiative of such a declaration and entrusted its first rendition to Cardinal Agostino Bea, who maintained a fruitful dialogue with Rabbi Yeshua Heschel on the issue. Nostra Aetate fulfills the requirements presented by Rabbi Heschel, who was a very, very known personality since the 50s till he passed away on 72 in Jewish American Society specifically, and in the General Society of United States of America and the whole world at large. Is Rabbi Heschel, Nostra Aetate fulfills the requirements presented by Rabbi Abraham Yeshua Heschel in the famous memorandum to Cardinal Bea on May 22nd, 1962. On December 1st, 1974, Johannes Cardinal Willebrand and Pierre-Marie de Contenson, President and Secretary respectively of the Vatican Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews, signed the document Guidelines and Suggestions for implementing the Conciliar Declaration Nostra Aetate number 4. On June 24th, 1985, Willebrand as President, Pierre Dupré as Vice President, and Jorge Mejia as Secretary of the Commission, signed the document named Notes on the Correct Way to Present the Jews and Judaism in Preaching and Catechesis in the Roman Catholic Church. Both documents develop deeply the spirit of Nostra Aetate, chapter 4. Pope John Paul II referred to Nostra Aetate and the last mentioned documents as milestones in the new Jewish-Catholic relations in his address at the Roman Synagogue on April the 13th, 1986. This visit of a pope to a synagogue and the establishment of diplomatic relations between the Holy See and the State of Israel have marked a new horizon for the relations between Jews and the Roman Catholic Church. Jews were aware of these changes and gestures, and they responded in different ways. For Cardinal Jorge Mejia, one of the important goals in the advancement of the dialogue was the presence and participation in the dialogue of rabbis from the Supreme Rabbinate of Israel. A second document to be considered is the Declaration Daberu Emet, redacted by a group of Jewish thinkers and signed by 220 intellectuals, which was published in the New York Times edition of September 10, 2000. This document tried to pave a way for the development of the relationships after the steps taken by the Holy See. The document stated 8 major points. First, Jews and Christians worship the same God. The second point is Jews and Christians seek authority from the same book. The third one is Christians can respect the claim of the Jews to the land of Israel. 4, Jews and Christians together accept the moral principles of the Torah, Pentateuch. Nazism is not a Christian phenomenon, is the point number 5. Point number 6, the controversy between Jews and Christians will not be settled until God redeems the entire world as promised in Scripture, and no one should be pressed into accepting another's faith. 7, the new relationships between Jews and Christians will not weaken Jewish practice. 8, Jews and Christians must work together for justice and peace. 7, the consensus among Jews. One of them is the affirmation that Nazism was not a Christian phenomenon. The text in that point literally says, Nazism was not a Christian phenomenon. Without the long history, and I quoted now the text of Daberu Emet in this point, in which it's affirmed that Nazism was not a Christian phenomenon. Without the long history of Christian anti-Judaism and Christian violence against Jews, Nazi ideology could not have taken hold, nor could it have been carried out. Too many Christians participated in or were sympathetic to Nazi atrocities against Jews. Other Christians did not protest sufficiently against these atrocities, but Nazism itself was not an inevitable outcome of Christianity. If the Nazi extermination of the Jews had been fully successful, it would have turned its murderous rage more directly to Christians. We recognize with gratitude those Christians who risked or sacrificed their lives to save Jews during the Nazi regime. With that in mind, we encourage the continuation of recent efforts in Christian theology to repudiate univocally contempt of Judaism and the Jewish people. We applaud those Christians who reject this teaching of contempt, and we do not blame them for the sins committed by their ancestors. And I would like now to compare this statement Daberu Emet from the Jewish thinkers and sages with the words regarding this point, with the words and the thoughts of Cardinal Walter Kasper that he wrote in the book Christ, Jesus and the Jewish People Today. In the foreword to the book, he expressed his ideas with these harsh words. The history of Jewish-Christian relations is complex and difficult. In addition to some better times, as when bishops took Jewish under their protection against pogroms by mobs, there were dark times that have been especially impressed upon the collective Jewish conscience. organized murder of approximately 6 million European Jews based on primitive racial ideology is the absolute low point in this history. The Holocaust cannot be attributed to Christianity as such. Centuries-old Christian theological anti-Judaism contributed as well, encouraging a widespread antipathy for Jews, so that ideologically and racially motivated anti-Semitism could prevail in this terrible way, and the resistance against the outrageous human brutality did not achieve that breadth and clarity that one should have expected. In the same way, in the same sense, wrote John Pawlikowski in the same book, the Church cannot enter into a fully authentic dialogue with the Jewish community, nor present itself and its teaching as a positive moral voice in contemporary society until it has cleansed its soul of its role in contributing to anti-Semitism. End of the quotation. These kinds of affirmations were accepted by all those who went ahead in the Catholic Church with the letter and spirit of Nostra Aetate, and they presented an objective and very acceptable point of view for Jews. However, a clear and unambiguous document is still hoped for by Jews from different Christian denominations regarding the critical treatment of all the concepts that paved the way for Christian anti-Semitism, not only those found in the patristic literature, but also those that can be found in the New Testament, such as in John chapter 8, verses 43-47. On the one hand, there are Jews who consider Christianity as a foreign worship, idolatry, and because of that, they have refused to accept the principles outlined in WMF. On the other hand, rabbinical personalities such as Rav Yitzchak, Isaac Halevi Herzog, Chaim David Halevi, and others have established on clear halachic grounds. Halacha is the name of the Jewish law, Jewish rabbinical law, that Christianity is a known idolatrous religion. WMF elicited criticisms from all those in the Jewish people who do not accept an interfaith dialogue. Meir Soloveitchik, the great nephew of the famous Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, published in the magazine Forward's issue of how Soloveitchik saw interreligious dialogue. In it, he explains the famous Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik's reasons in his refusing the dialogue. In one of the paragraphs he wrote, the Rav's opposition, and quoting, the Rav's opposition to communal and organizational interfaith dialogue was partly predicated upon the prediction that in our search for common ground, a shared theological language, Jews and Christians might each sacrifice our insistence on the absolute and exclusive truth of our respective faith, respective dogmas, in an easy tactical confrontation. Rabbi Soloveitchik argued that a community's faith is an intimate and often incommunicable affair. Furthermore, a faith by definition insists that its system of dogmas doctrines, and values is best fitted for the attainment of the ultimate good. In his essay, the Rabbi warned that sacrificing the exclusive nature of religious truth in the name of dialogue would help neither Jews nor Christians. Any, in quotation signs, equalization of dogmatic certitudes and waiving of eschatological claims spell the end of the vibrant and great faith experiences of any religious community. Close of the quotation signs, he wrote, end of the quotation. Rabbi Soloveitch's position could be understood only under the superficial meaning of the concept of dialogue. When the dialogue has a merely sympathetic relationship as its target, the real dialogue means much more than that. And Buber's teaching and existential experience could serve as an outstanding example to my own understanding of the interfaith dialogue. This kind of dialogue is the dialogue I developed with the then Cardinal Bergoglio, Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and today Pope Francis. One that could develop by each one with himself, with the other, with nature, and with God. He maintained intensive dialogues with Christian theologians, such as Rudolf Bultmann, Albert Schweitzer, Rudolf Otto, and Leonard Ragatz, whose knowledge was essential to his understanding of the New Testament. And it was through that knowledge which he acquired through a deep dialogue that he came to affirm that Judaism and Christianity were two, quotation signs, two types of faith. In a book entitled precisely Two Types of Faith, Buber concludes, I quote Buber, "The faith of Judaism and the faith of Christendom are by nature different in kind, each in conformity with its human basis, and they will indeed remain different until mankind is gathered in from the exiles of the religions into the kingship of God. But an Israel striving after the renewal of its faith through the rebirth of the person, and the Christianity striving for the renewal of its faith through the rebirth of nations, would have something as yet unsaid to say to each other, and help to give to one another hardly to be conceived at the present time." End of the quotation. Buber stresses a differentiation between Pauline Christianity, Pauline Christianity, the Christianity of Paul, and Jesus' teachings in the Gospels. The later he understands in terms of the pure Jewish belief in God, emunah, and he argues that the Hellenistic Pauline syncretism transformed that belief into a Greek pistis. Emunah is Hebrew, pistis is Greek, of course. Buber proposes in this book a way to develop a deep dialogue with the Christian world. It is very significant the conditions under which Buber wrote the book in his own words. In the preface to the book, in the foreword, he says, "I wrote this book in Jerusalem during the days of its so-called siege." He refers that to the war of independence of Israel, or rather in the chaos of destruction which broke out within it. he refers to the composition of the book, I began it without a plan, purely under the feeling of a commission. And in this way, chapter after chapter has come into being. The work involved has helped me to endure in face this war. For me, the most grievous of the three. He refers to the First World War, to the Second, and now this third. He suffered the war of the independence of Israel in 1948. End of the quotation. An analysis of the beginnings of Christianity to understand its essential nature as a way of a commencement of a dialogue from the Jewish side was also the method used by the famous professor Joseph Klausner. Another famous professor, David Flusser, was one of those who, through the research of the sources, tried to understand the past in order to shape a future relation. He concludes and affirms that only from the synoptic Gospels do we know the faith of Jesus. Outside them is the faith incarnate. Only from the synoptic Gospels do we know the faith of Jesus. Outside them is the faith in Christ that is mostly presented and developed. Very interesting, this quotation. Only from the synoptic Gospels do we know the faith of Jesus. Outside them is the faith in Christ that is mostly presented and developed. When I asked myself, what was the common Christian area on which we developed the then Cardinal Bergoglio and me could develop our dialogue. My idea is because he is very close to the spirit of the Gospels, especially of the Synoptic Gospels. He is very close to the teachings of Jesus, which appear in the Gospels. As David Flusser said, he knows the faith of Jesus in a very special way, and of course, he as a Christian continues with the faith increase. But first of all, what built up a common language and understanding between us was the Jewishness of Jesus. The faith of Jesus we can see in the Synoptic Gospels, as Flusser affirms that. Continuing with Flusser's words, Paul was the most important factor in a trend which gave birth to Christianity as a distinct religion, because he deepened its Christology and stressed the inevitable necessity of accepting it for salvation. And he was the most extreme exponent of the doctrine that Jewish way of life had no validity for Christians. To whom Paul wrote his epistle were surely gentle God-fearers before becoming Christians. The Testament, Paul's opinion is that by being converted to Christianity, they, in quotation signs, have died to the law by becoming identified with the body of Christ. Finally, he remarks, on the other hand, the origin of Christianity in Jewish and many of the first Gentile Christians were close to Judaism. Jesus and his disciples were observant Jews. Therefore, Christianity had to solve the problem of why the Jewish people did not embrace Christianity. The separation of Christianity from Judaism was brought about by heightening the centrifugal tendency which produced opposition to and even hatred of Jews and Gentile Christians. The Jewish origin of Christianity and the failure of Christianity to convert the Jewish people to the new message was precisely the reason for the strong anti-Jewish trend in Christianity. This explains the disharmony between the old and new community, which is probably unique in the history of religions. Tensions towards Judaism was an historical necessity for Christianity in order to become a world religion for former pagans, a need which no longer exists. Today, Christianity can renew itself out of Judaism, and with the help of Judaism, then the challenge left for us by all those who look into the sources of Christianity is to for us continue looking at them for new perspectives. There is a story in the Talmud in which it is possible to distinguish the two components of Christianity described by Buber and Flusser. In the Tractate of Shabbat, we read as follows. This story appears in the Talmud. Ima Shalom, Rabbi Eliezer's wife, was Rabbi Gamliel's sister. Now a certain philosopher lived in the vicinity, and he bore a reputation that he did not accept bribes. They wished to expose him. So she brought him a golden lamp, went before him, and said to him, I desire that a share be given me in my deceased father's estate. Divine orderly, said he, Rabbi Gamliel, to him, it is decreed for us, where there is a son, a daughter does not inherit. The philosopher replied, since that you were exiled from your land, the law of Moses has been suppressed, and another book given, wherein it is written, of quotation signs, a son and a daughter inherit equally. The next day, Rabbi Gamliel brought him a Lydian ass. Look at the end of the book, wherein it is written, I came not to destroy the law of Moses, nor to add the law of Moses. And it is written therein, a daughter does not inherit where there is a son. To him, and ass came and knocked the lamp over. Because one day the philosopher said one word, one opinion, and afterwards he changed his opinion. This is in a very critical way in the last sentence of Rabbi Gamliel. And ass came and knocked the lamp over. End of the quotation. Undoubtedly, the story is referring to an encounter between Rabbi Gamliel and his wife, Ima Shalom, very known in the Talmudic sources for her cleverness, with a member of the Christian congregation at the end of the 1st century, or beginning maybe of the 2nd century. If we consider the story to be real and not a legend based on a reality of later times, the word translated here as philosopher appears as philosopher in this Talmudic text. In some other rabbinical texts, the word appears as philosophos, as referring to thinkers whose concept could identify them as belonging to the first Christian congregations, and in others with pagan ideas. But the words I stress, another book given in the Talmudic paragraph, appears in the Oxford Codex as, and the law of the Evangelium has been given. There is no passage in any no gospel that the son and daughter inherit alike. And the verse alluded from the Gospels seems to be Matthew 5:17 and for a continuation there. The story could be understood as a harsh criticism against those who put aside the law, arguing that Judea's destruction by the Romans ended the validity of the law of the Torah, but presents in no critical way Jesus' teachings, who affirm that Moses' Torah must be kept. The views of the Jewish Christian and Gentile Christians seems to be presented in this story, because the first community of Christians was conformed by Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. Jews who tried to continue with the Jewish tradition, and Gentiles tried to apart themselves from the Jewish tradition. Another very analyzed story of the Talmud, which shows the similar image of Jews and Christians that Romans had, appears in Avodah Zarah, the tractate of paganism cults, and it refers to Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus, a sage of the first century of this era. It is told in an Agadah, in a story in which it's described that he was arrested by the Romans on the charge of being a Christian. After his liberation, he realized that he was punished by God for the sin of feeling a pleasure from the words of a disciple of Jesus from Nazareth. Jews had about Christians during the last 20 centuries. An astonishing example of this ambivalence in the interpretation of certain passages of rabbinic sources can be seen in the understanding of Ben Pettora's point of view in his discussion with Rabbi Akiva, as it appears in the tractate of Bava Metzia. I quote the paragraph. Now, how does Rabbi Yochanan interpret that thy brother may live with thee, which appears in Leviticus 25:36? That thy brother may live with thee. The Chei in Hebrew, V'chei achi chaimach. He utilizes it for that which was taught. If two are traveling in a journey far from civilization, and one has a pitcher of water, if both drink, they will both die. But if one only drinks, he can reach civilization. The son of Patura taught, it is better that both should drink and die, rather than that one should behold his companion's death. And the Rabbi Akiva came and taught that thy brother may live with thee. Thy life takes precedence over his life. Ahad Ha'am, the famous philosopher, thinker of the Jewish thinker of the 20th century, the first part, identifies this Ben Pettora's opinion as a Christian one. But from another side, a very important rabbi, Meir Leibush ben Yechiel Lichut, who lived in the 19th century, understood that Ben Azai, the very famous rabbi, in the Talmudic times, in the first and second century of this era, that Ben Azai has the same opinion as the Christian Ben Petora, or the supposed Christian Ben Petora. Yeah, of course, that man, according to the Rabbi Leibush Ben Yechiel Michuvisen, of course that Ben Petora was not considered a Christian. But Ahad understood that he is a Christian. This dual interpretation is this dual interpretation, especially if we understand that the first Christian congregation were in close dialogue with the rabbinical milieu of that time, and that they shared with rabbis many points of view. But with this dual interpretation, we can understand is that at certain points you don't know from the teachings of the sages from Talmud and from sages who represent Christians' ideas, who is who, because at certain point they are discussing different aspects of the same ethic, of the rabbinic ethic, of the Torah's ethic. This is seen among many others in the parallels pointed out, this kind of comparisons we can do between Christian affirmations from the first century with Talmudic opinions. We can make parallels as did Gedaliahu Alon, the famous professor in the Hebrew University, between rabbinical sources from the first century and the Didache. The renewal of the future Christian-Jewish dialogue must resume the old dialogue, which was disrupted almost 2,000 years ago. Of course, it is impossible to restart the dialogue at the same point in which it was broken off, and disregarding all that happened during the succeeding 2,000 years. But the challenge for both sides is to see each the other as a partner in the struggle of a common challenge, to install a dimension of spirituality in the midst of humanity, erasing idolatry in all its forms from human reality. In the words of Rabbi Abraham Yoshua Heschel, Nazism has suffered a defeat, but the process of eliminating the Bible from the conscience of the Western world goes on. It is on the issue of saving the radiance of the Hebrew Bible in the minds of man that Jews and Christians are called to work together. None of us can do that alone. For Catholics, the new approach and dialogue with Jews based on the Nostradate theological statements opens a theological quest. What does the Old Testament mean for them now? Taking into account that the Old Covenant with the Jewish people is still valid. For Jews, this means to make more to heart Maimonides' statement, the famous Rambam statement in his authoritative code. It is beyond, I quoted Maimonides in his code, the famous code, one of the bases of Jewish halakha, of Jewish law, of Jewish belief. It is beyond the human mind to fathom the designs of the creature. For our ways are not his ways, because our ways are not his ways. Neither are our thoughts his thoughts. All these matters relating to Jesus of Nazareth and the Ishmaelite, the Muhammad, he refers here to the Muslim world, who came after him, served to clear the way for King Messiah, to prepare the whole world to worship God with one accord as it is written. For then I will turn to the people a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one concept, in the words of Prophet Zephaniah. End of the quotation. There is still a long way before us until Nostra Aetate in its body and spirit will be incorporated into the heart of all the churches and parishes throughout the world. But still, the next step for Jews and Christians must be to think and to analyze the present dramatic moment in humankind's history in order to continue paving a way, the way referred by Maimonides, for a better future. I hope that my English wasn't so bad and that more or less you understood me. Thank you so much.
Rabbi Skorka, thank you for a remarkable lecture that was simultaneously both broad and very erudite. I apologize for the technological errors on our end, but I suppose the positive is that it forced you to listen a little bit more closely, and it allowed the Jewish midrashic principles to come into play so that you can take great hermeneutical license with whatever Rabbi Skorka said. That being the case, we have the opportunity for a few moments of questions, and what I'd like to do is to ask you to line up over here and then walk up here to the microphone so that we can get the question on film as well as audio. We have time for only 2 or 3 questions, I would guess, depending on the length of the response. So one final caveat, and that is we prefer that these be questions and not lectures in response. So if you could line up over here if you have some questions, we'd be happy to take a few.
What I understood the rabbi to say is that Jesus was a Jew and that the historical Jesus was very much in conformity with the Old Testament. And I also understood him to say that the interpretation based on Paul, the reinterpretation of Jesus and the relation of the 2 covenants seems to be an obstacle. And I don't know if that's clear, and what point do we have to begin to go further in the dialogue.
I didn't understand exactly the question.
I heard 2 points. One is that you consider the historical Jesus of the synoptic gospels to be in conformity with the Jewish scriptures. But the second point is that some of the interpretations, especially of Paul, of the Christ and the relationship between the 2 covenants seems to be the difficulty. If so, is that true? And where do we continue this dialogue?
We, the Pope and me, are understanding the continuation of this dialogue is not discussing exactly about theological points, but trying to understand one the other and trying to make a definition, a very clear definition, what for Jews, what really means Christianity, for the Christians, what really Jewishness are for them. The idea is not to enter into disputations as it was in the past, but to know very clearly Jews and Christians that we are paving parallel and complementary ways in order to approach a dimension of God on the earth, on our human reality. At certain opportunity, after I wrote this paper, in order to know my good friend's definition about how he sees the next step, without so many quotations, but in a very direct way, he told me, look, the next step must be a theological one. And he quoted 2 books, even a bibliography. So he mentioned 2 books. One book is a book named The Promise of Cardinal Lustiger. As you well know, Cardinal Jew, who at a certain moment in his life he converted to Catholicism, and he became Archbishop of Paris. This book, The Promise, he emphasizes as a priest, he emphasizes to Jews, because this book, the second part, has conferences he gave at the University of Tel Aviv and other institutions to a Jewish public, and as a Catholic from a Jewish origin, he emphasizes the importance to the Jews to continue maintaining the Jewish spirituality and the Jewish condition. And from the other side, another book written by an Argentinian who lives in Israel and who developed a theory in which he sees the Christianity as a parallel way to the Jewish way to Geulah, towards Geulah. Geulah means redemption. The idea of the next step is to create, as I understand the words of the Pope, is to create a very clear statements in Jewish side, the Christian side, in order to obtain clear definitions which demonstrated the respect from one to the other and the recognition that, as Maimonides wrote in the 12th century, both ways, the Christian and the Jewish way, are complements, are working towards the redemption of the world.
Thank you. We have time for one final question.
Hello, Rabbi. I am a fulfilled Jew. I am a Catholic. And in 1996, I was baptized into the Catholic Church after being raised in the Jewish faith. And for me, like my predecessor in Paris, what you realize when you truly believe something is you have to speak the truth, but you have to speak it with love. I am a fulfilled Jew, and as such, I deeply love the Jewish faith that I was raised in, and I'm united with it inextricably, as the Jewish people are united with the Catholic peoples. And I have seen, as the Jewish priesthood has ended, as the temple in Jerusalem has never been rebuilt in the sense that people expected it to be. For me, the covenant promised by God to his people was fulfilled in Jesus Christ. And so we need to be in a dialogue. But if we love God and we love the truth, how do we carry out that if in our hearts we know what that truth is and that he has a name, Jesus Christ?
Again, dialogue means to try to understand the other, to respect the other, to make an empathic attitude from time to time regarding the other. And the dialogue we maintained with Bergoglio at many opportunities, we stress the point that the aim of the dialogue is not to try to change the faith of the other, but to give the other the opportunity through the dialogue for the Jew to be a better Jew, and for the Catholic or for the Christian to be a better Christian. Dialogue means to know where are the limits to respect the other, and how it's possible to build up a bridge in which each one of the parts of the dialogue, in its differences and through its differences, can try to approach the other part. A dialogue is a very sensitive point and is the key in order to build up a better world. Dialogue is not to enter into the questions of the judging of the truth of the faith. It's impossible, because faith is a very subjective theme. Faith is not a science that you can go to a laboratory and to check if your theory is correct. It's a question, it's a very subjective question. And in this diversity and respecting totally this diversity, our challenge is to build up, to construct a common language, a language through which one can understand the drama of the other and can distinguish in the other really a brother. This is not a direct answer to your question, but these are remarkable points that I would like to remark in order to understand really what was and how it continues being the dialogue I built up with the Pope, as it appears especially in our book and in the programs of television we recorded.
Rabbi Skorka, thank you very much for your time and your wonderful insights. I wish we had more time with you, but it looks like we have a hungry audience that needs to find some lunch. I would remind you that we're back in this room at 1 o'clock for the next session. Thank you.